It is on the brink of all-out war in Lebanon this morning as Israeli strikes accelerate across the border. As Benjamin Netanyahu looked into the camera this weekend and said, if Hezbollah does not get the message, we've got another one coming. And that is coming in the form of around-the-clock strikes on Hezbollah positions. And for the first time I'm aware of in this war, which began by Hezbollah on October 8th, the day after the massacre by Hamas of Israelis in southern Israel. Hezbollah in southern Lebanon began shelling, repeatedly attacking. More than 8,500 rockets, projectiles, missiles, drones have been sent into Israel. And this weekend, in the aftermath of the pager and walkie-talkie espionage, sabotage, magnificently orchestrated, very targeted attack on terrorists in Lebanon, Israel began a bombardment that has accelerated overnight, and many, many people believe this is the beginning of the war, and the war in the north. I'm sure Israel is not telling us everything that they are going to do, but for the first time, they are dropping leaflets on the villages in southern Lebanon saying, get out, go north. Get out, go north. And for 11 months, the villagers of southern Lebanon who've got nothing to do with Hezbollah knew that, and they've already largely left, but they should get out more, because this is not going to be soft. This is not going to be a gentle touch. It's going to be a hammer blow on Hezbollah before they can use their 150,000 missiles on Israel, at least most of them. The other major bit of news is that the New York Times this morning released 3 state polls: Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. New York Times, mind you. Trump is up by 5 in Arizona, up by 4 in Georgia, up by 2 in North Carolina. I don't think that North Carolina number is correct, but it does indicate to me that Donald Trump is pulling away in the battleground states. Now, there was polling over the weekend that said Kamala Harris had a 4-point lead nationally. Don't believe it. I suppose they could poll California and she'd have a 25-point lead. I don't know how pollsters do it anymore. They have something like a 92% non-response rate. Then they have to model the electorate, and they have to figure out who is going to actually work to get out the Harris vote. There is just an enormous amount of audio to get through today, because Kamala was out talking on the weekend in Wisconsin. She is back in Virginia again, and former president was doing an event with Governor Youngkin in Virginia, where early voting began on Saturday. In the 2 states where early voting has begun, in both Pennsylvania and Virginia, I have to think this is a great time to be Donald Trump. Let me play for you his latest ad, which is at cut number 38, because when he comes out with one of these, it's going everywhere. I don't know where it's going to show, but let's play cut number 38.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
It's hard to believe, but it's true. Even the liberal media was shocked Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners and illegal aliens.
Every transgender inmate would have access.
Kamala's for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
No, I have nothing against transgendered people. They are listening to the show. I do know I don't want to pay for their surgery, and I do not want to pay for their lifelong care. That meaning taxpayers should have nothing to do with this. Private insurance companies can price it in. However, that is a hard-hitting ad. It's a 30-second ad. It is going to, I'm sure, rock Pennsylvania's world. Rick Klein was on ABC this week. All right, we're going to go down to cut number 48 and play Rick Klein, who wants to alert. Rick Klein is no friend of Republicans. ABC is in the tank for Kamala Harris. I believe ABC Disney rigged the debate and did not ask one question about China, because ABC is owned by Disney and Disney is owned by China. Not literally, but figuratively in the latter case, literally in the former case. Here is Rick Klein on what the polls are showing us, cut 48.
30-plus point advantage for Joe Biden in the exit polls among Latino voters from 4 years ago. Hillary Clinton won Latino voters by 40 points. And, of course, she still lost the presidency. So there's some real ground to make up across demographics, but particularly with Latino voters. Kamala Harris has some issues that she's got to attend to.
So that's not a friend of former President Trump pointing out that Latinos are moving dramatically towards Kamala Harris. I was on Martha McCallum on Friday, and I got a chance to watch and comment on the Oprah fiasco. I think it turned out to have really hurt Team Harris, really backfired. They are not happy with this. Cut number 46.
Let's go down the line. Hugh, your reaction to this Oprah event?
I played a lot of it on my program this morning, Martha, because it's so bad it had to be heard to be believed. The vice president's like an old jukebox with only 6 bad songs in it. And whether you hit MacArthur's Park or Imagine, it's always bad. It gets worse with repetition, even when she has as her wingman the country's greatest communicator, Oprah. Along with Rush Limbaugh, the only person to build and maintain an audience of 20 million people daily for years. I can't believe how bad the vice president was last night, and I hope a lot of people saw it because I want Donald Trump to win. That's just it. I hope everyone saw it. I listened. I thought I was hard on them. If you listen to the Megyn Kelly podcast after the Oprah show, that made me look like Mr. Rogers, because they went through blow by blow. At the end, the subject of the debate comes up. Cut number 47.
Hugh, Brian Fallon, who's obviously very senior with the campaign, thinks that they may get another debate. And there's a suggestion that there should be one on Fox because obviously she would reach a lot of independent voters. What are your thoughts on that? Do you see that happening now? And do you think that President Trump would do that at this point?
The only debate I think can happen would be one that you and Brett moderated. I believe you would both be fair and both do follow-ups, and I have no idea what your politics are. I have no idea what Brett Baer's politics are. I would not agree to any of the other networks, and I've worked with them all. I've done moderated debates with Dana Bash. I've moderated debates with Lester and Kristen this past November. It requires that you be very even-handed, and they are very scripted, as you know, Martha. It's worked out beforehand. The ABC debate was the worst debate in history, and we can't have that happen again. It was a disservice to both of the candidates, especially to Donald Trump and to the American people. So if it happens again, I think that Brian Fallon ought to come hat in hand to you and Brett and beg you to beg Donald Trump to do another debate. And I don't think Kamala Harris would dare go near that. And Kamala Harris this weekend said, we want Dana Bash and Jake Tapper back. We think we ought to have the same rules. And, he did it once, he's going to do it again. No, maybe if they swap out Jake for me or Dana for me, because I've worked with both of them, I know how CNN, we're happy to do it. But no, you can't walk into another ambush. And these are corporate events that send corporate messages developed by corporate groups, unless you have an outsider in the room. I've done it 5 times with networks, 4 with CNN, 1 with NBC. The corporate people take over, and you must have an independent base, like I do, that you are not afraid of the boss, and you are not trying to impress anyone in the room. You're trying to be fair for voters. Here's what I would do a debate on. I would love to have a debate on Israel, because I think it matters a lot. Here is the question. Which of these 2 people will support Israel more in the coming war with Hezbollah? Donald Trump or Kamala Harris? I don't think that's hard. I think Donald Trump will have Israel's back 100%. He will say, as he said to me and in many other places in the last 3 months, Israel's got to win quickly. They can't go slow. Well, part of the reason they're going slow is they haven't got the weaponry that Joe Biden is still sitting on, especially when it comes to the Lebanon tunnels that Hezbollah has built. They're bigger, stronger, larger, longer than the Hamas tunnels. And they're going to need those 2,000-pound bombs, and they need to get the villages evacuated, and Donald Trump would give them to them. Donald Trump would not be telling them, as Kamala Harris says, we need a deal, we got to have a deal. That's all she says. It's jukebox hit number 3, Itchy Park. Let's come back with Itchy Park, because that makes my skin crawl, as does the vice president talking about we must have a deal, we're going to have a deal. There isn't a deal to do with Hamas. In fact, over the weekend, the only good thing about yesterday was the report that maybe they got Sinwar. They don't know. They're investigating, but maybe they got Sinwar. We will find out more as the day goes on. We need the energy. We need nuclear energy. We need oil. We need natural gas. We need wind. We need every kind, geothermal, wave, you name it. Energy is freedom. Also from the Wall Street Journal, BlackRock, Microsoft partner on massive new AI infrastructure fund. You see, we know that we need artificial intelligence to keep pace with the Chi-Com, and we know that we need supercomputing. Both of those require immense amount of electricity that we do not currently generate in the United States. California, were the lights on this weekend in California? I don't know. I think they were. But California has the worst grid. Texas has a bad grid. But it's not just the grid. We don't have the base load. Right? The very first, you got to make the energy, then you got to get to where it needs to be. And that means all kinds of energy all over the place. And when Microsoft bought 3 Mile Island, they said, hurrah, hooray, we're going to start up the old reactors and we're going to build some new first-generation ones. And BlackRock, Microsoft, and the United Arab Emirates, state-backed investor MGX, are partnering on a new artificial intelligence infrastructure fund that aims to raise $30 billion to invest in data centers and related power infrastructure. Bravo. Playing Bad Bumps today in honor of the bad jukebox that is Kamala Harris. She only has 6 cuts in there, and they're all terrible. Joining me to discuss that is Vic Mattis. Victorino Mattis is co-host of Getting Hammered. There you see him on the right if you're watching on the Salem News Channel. He's also the weekend editor at the Free Beacon. Vic, good Monday. I hope you're doing well.
Hello, Hugh. Yes, I am doing well and just barely made it in for this show after a late connection flight last night, taking my son for his first college tour. We went to Notre Dame.
Oh, so that, I've done that tour. It takes 2 minutes. Did he like it?
Loved it. We actually went to the game too, so it was a good day.
Yeah, you go to the grotto, you go to the game, and then you go home because you don't want him to see
prayers.
Chicago. You don't want him to go to Chicago. Vic, I listened to you and Mary Catherine talk about the Oprah interview, and I listened to you. I also, by the way, whenever you start about buffets, I'm almost certain to skip past that because I cringe at buffet talk. I heard your shout out. Thank you for the shout out. Buffet talk just makes me, do you ever go to Sizzler, Vic? You ever go to a Sizzler?
I think like once or twice ever in my life. Where I grew up, there are places like Ponderosa. It's the same idea. You sort of bust your tray for a grill. It's, it's like steak, but it's not steak. It's steak, but they cut it in half. That's why it's so affordable,
Yeah, well,
but it works.
When I was poor and in law school, my buddy Butler and I would go to the Sizzler because it's the closest thing to a buffet that I can deal with. But even that, I regret those days dramatically. Okay, Vic, you and Mary Catherine talked about Oprah. I talked about Oprah on Friday, and then I listened to Megyn Kelly's podcast, and I thought I was hard and you were hard on Oprah. Whoa, was she hard on Oprah? I think, in fact, the reason they're asking for a debate is they're trying to get everyone away from watching the Oprah clips. What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. If they thought that they were doing well, there's no reason for them to have her back on television and take that enormous chance and having her deliver another word salad. The problem is the interviews she does, even with this softball interview with Oprah Winfrey, with all the celebrities coming in. Isn't it so cool? They all love her. Shouldn't you love her too? She also delivered word salads, and so yeah, it wasn't great. She had one line, I think it was like, rightly having the right to have dreams and aspirations.
Let me do the close, Vic. This is hard on you. You've heard it before, but for the benefit of the audience that has not heard any of the Oprah, this is the close, cut number 29. Kamala Harris on with Oprah.
We love our country. I love our country. I know we all do. That's why everybody's here right now. We love our country. We take pride in the privilege of being American. And this is a moment where we can and must come together as Americans, understanding we have so much more in common than what separates us. Let's come together with the character that we are so proud of about who we are, which is we are an optimistic people. We are an optimistic people. Americans, by character, are people who have dreams and ambitions and aspirations. We believe in what is possible. We believe in what can be. And we believe in fighting for that. That's how we came into being, because the people before us understood that one of the greatest expressions for the love of our country, one of the greatest expressions of patriotism, is to fight for the ideals of who we are, which includes freedom to make decisions about your own body, freedom to be safe from gun violence, freedom to have access to the ballot box, freedom to be who you are and just be, to love who you love openly and with pride, freedom to just be. And that's who we are. We believe in all that. And so this is a moment where we stand knowing what we are fighting for. We're not fighting against. It's what we're fighting for.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam Vice President.
Vic Mattis, you get to go first.
Again, I feel like the character Belloc in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where his head explodes at the end. That's quite something. I mean, I know there are a lot of voters out there who say, "Oh, I'd rather vote for a can of soup than for Donald Trump." And I think these are those voters. You cannot sit through that and think to yourself that this candidate has everything that you need to be the president of the United States of America. It's kind of this empty vessel. And I mean, look, you mentioned the jukebox with all the bad hits. I mean, that's right. I mean, it reminds me of a friend who once played a prank at a bar where all he did was play on a jukebox Who Let the Dogs Out like 5 or 6 times on his way out the door, just to, torment people. And that's basically what this is the equivalent of. I don't know how you can, sit through that with, without thinking, okay, this woman knows nothing.
That is the conclusion, which is why I believe she is asking for another debate. She's trying to get it onto the home court with Jake and Dana. Donald Trump's not going to do that. And I don't know that he'll do even Brett Baer and Martha McCollum. And I just think he's got a perfect excuse to say he doesn't need an excuse. He's winning. What do you think he ought to say in response to Brian Fallon and everyone at Team Kamala pounding the table and demanding another debate?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you're right that he shouldn't take the bait about doing another debate, because if you're up, that's usually the reason not to do these things, because you only open yourself up for more opportunities, to get yourself into trouble. On the other hand, Trump is very bold and impulsive in this way, and very confident. And I'm sure he thinks that I can take her on. Yes, I'll say yes again, but I really don't hope he does it on CNN or ABC, wherever. And that if he does do it somewhere, it's going to be on Fox, as you mentioned, with Brett and Martha McCallum. That would be ideal, and I think it would only be right after having done the other debates in the other two places.
I have a suggestion, which is accept the CNN debate. However, Dana is going to be replaced by Mary Catherine, or Jake is going to be replaced by Hugh Hewitt. Both Mary Catherine and I have done debates, and so they can't argue we can't do debates. We know how they work. We know how they set up. And so either you pull Dana and you put Mary Catherine in, or you pull Jake and you put me in, and maybe you do that. But really, they ought to go with Brett and Martha, because what Kamala is afraid of is a follow-up. She hasn't had one follow-up in 60 days.
That's right. They mean to ask her some tough questions, and then when she opens up with the phrase, "Let me start with this," you're not getting the direct answer, and then you end up with knowing that she grew up in a neighborhood where people cared about their lawns, and it means nothing.
Yeah.
And so again, people have to sort of convince themselves that this is okay, and I don't know if that's working or not. It's certainly not working on me.
Vic, did you grow up in a middle-class family?
I did because yes, it's true. My father was a doctor in Toms River, New Jersey, but they don't start off rich. We grew up in an apartment. I mean, that's where I was born, and then we ended up going with my dad still has the same ranch Rambler house to this day that we.
Yeah, I grew up in a middle-class family. I also began life in an apartment. Dad bought a house for $13,500 on Arthur Street in Warren in 1960. And by the time I went to college, I would say he was upper middle class because he was at that point 55. But I don't believe that I grew up in a middle class is a winning message anymore because we've heard it 55 million times. And I do believe in repetition. Repetition delivers. Getting hammered. You guys always begin the same way. I love your little news bumps. There is an art to communicating, which is to over-communicate the basic stuff. But she now needs to actually, I think she's falling in the polls because she's so vapid. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, but what you're asking of her is an incredibly difficult ask, which is to elaborate on policies. And if you get down to it, I mean, either, you hate Trump enough that no matter what she says or doesn't say, you're going to vote for her, fine. That's a win for her. But, if trying to nail her down on where she stands now versus 2019 when she filled out that now famous ACLU questionnaire, good luck with that. I mean, I can see
So glad you brought that up.
Internal struggle. Yeah.
Because there's a new Donald Trump ad out this morning on the 2019 ACLU questionnaire. Cut number, I want to make sure I get the right cut. Cut number 38.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners, every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
It's hard to believe, but it's true. Even the liberal media was shocked Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners and illegal aliens.
Every transgender inmate would have access.
Kamala's for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Vic, your reaction to that ad?
Okay, that was devastating. When she's there posing with the Assistant Secretary of Health, that's really, that it just goes over the top. That's it. You don't have to say anything, and you just, if you're a voter out there, the question is for you: does this seem right or not? And
did you hear the closing tagline? Kamala Harris is for they, them. President Trump is for you.
Yeah, that's right.
Some copywriter, somebody's brilliant.
Yeah, it's well done. If they have the means to get that onto the airwaves and enough voters see that, then yeah, it's a good reminder of, okay, well, let's be careful of what you're getting into here because this is all we know right now based on this. And she hasn't been able to elaborate if she disagrees with any of it and why. And I think you and I would agree Bernie Sanders was right. She is just saying what she needs to say now in order to be more palatable for the general electorate. And get elected, and then actually she'll just do the bidding of the far left.
Those of you who listen to the show since it began in 2000 know that the David Dreyer chair is never empty. David Dreyer was my weekly congressional guest, and then he passed it on to John Campbell, who passed it on to Tom Cotton, who passed it on to Mike Pompeo, who passed it on to Mike Gallagher, who passed it on to Michael Waltz. And you also know that even though Congressman Waltz is here every week, the folks who have previously held the chair never really go away. Now, sometimes we might want them to go away, like when they're Green Bay Packers fans, but like a bad penny, Congressman Mike Gallagher, now retired, is back because he has a brand new column for the Wall Street Journal. He's with the Hudson Institute. He's head of defense for Palantir. Got to do my disclosure. You've heard me say for years I already owned Palantir stock before they hired Gallagher. I considered selling it when they did that. But Congressman Gallagher is back because he's got a new Wall Street Journal column. What I did not know, Congressman, is that you would put these out on Monday so you could torment me about the Browns losing to the Giants the day before. So let's just get it out of the way.
Well, Hugh, as you know, I am never the one to take the first shot when it comes to football. I have been the victim of your preemptive assaults for the better part of a decade now. And the main reason why I left the Dreyer chair in Congress was because I was bullied on a weekly basis by you to hold you responsible for the Packers' ignominious early exit in the playoffs in recent years.
Everybody should be so bullied that they end up at the Hudson Institute, the Wall Street Journal, and Palantir. But let's get to this story because it came out today. Exploding pagers and the tech race with China. I've read it. Will you tell people why you decided to write about the exploding pagers, which of course exploded in Lebanon, and how that has anything to do with China? I get it, but explain it in terms that even a Packers fan would understand.
Well, first of all, there is the operation itself, which is remarkable if you start to think through everything that was necessary to make it happen, intercepting the pagers, implanting explosives in them, and then remotely detonating it without being discovered. But I see it as connected to a string of incidents in recent years that I think presage a new era of warfare. So remember, a few years ago, Russian soldiers stole $5 million worth of John Deere equipment from occupied Ukraine. And later they discovered that when the tractors, which were connected to the internet, they could be remotely disabled and just turned into a heap of junk. We have incidents in China where Tesla drivers found their cars banned because of worries about espionage. And then, of course, public reports about the Chinese infiltrating our own infrastructure. And then if you go back even and implanting malware into water utilities, energy utilities, things like that. If you go back even further to the early stages of the Trump administration, we had this big debate about Chinese telecommunication companies, Huawei and ZTE, and an international effort led by Matt Pottinger, Robert O'Brien, and many others to dissuade our allies from adopting Chinese infrastructure, because the concern is that with a combination of hardware and software, these access points, these bits of technology can be used as weapons of war. Imagine the chaos that would be caused if, for example, the Chinese were to disable cranes, smart cranes at port facilities across America. And ZPMC, a Chinese state giant, is the dominant global player when it comes to smart cranes. That critical infrastructure access I mentioned before, you have to assume that if we find ourselves in a confrontation with China over Taiwan, they will attack us early in cyberspace, potentially disabling our critical infrastructure. So all of that, in my opinion, points to a further bifurcation of the world between what I call a free world technology stack and a totalitarian technology stack. And companies that are caught in the middle, or companies that find their supply chains infected by Chinese technology, Russian technology, or otherwise, are going to find it very, very difficult to operate in that world going forward. So our task is to ensure that the free world technology stack is not only better and more innovative and more secure, but also can compete with the commies and the fascists and the totalitarians when it comes to price. And the only way to do that is to align with our closest allies. So that is the connection between exploding pagers in Lebanon and the disabling potentially of infrastructure in the heart of America if we find ourselves in a war with China.
This warms the heart of a radio host who's and now television host who has had the dryer chair. Because last week, Congressman Waltz said, supply chain sabotage works both ways, and maybe we want to look at our cranes. I'm going to go back to before when you were in Congress, Congressman. One of the times I separated from the Bush administration when W and Dick Cheney were running things is when they wanted to okay the sale of ports to Chinese operating companies. And the port deal crashed and burned over that. We can't have the CCP running our ports like they're running the Panama Canal. How do we debug what we've already bought from them? Is that something we can do?
We absolutely can, but it's not going to be cost free. And this is the rub, I think. What is the role of industrial policy? What is the right combination of government incentives or subsidies? We're conducting a massive experiment right now when it comes to semiconductors in the form of the CHIPS Act. The early result does not look good. We've saddled it with too many onerous regulations. And by the way, even in the most optimistic or ambitious implementation of the CHIPS Act, we aren't going to be able to wean ourselves off our dependency on TSMC, the Taiwanese semiconductor giant, in a meaningful sense. We will still have to care about what happens in Taiwan. So we should seek to try different experiments when it comes to the really critical areas. You mentioned ports. I would also nominate advanced pharmaceutical ingredients, energetics, the things we put in our weapon systems. There's a small subset of areas where we are going to have to figure out the right combination of radical deregulation, which is the biggest impediment to growth here domestically and the biggest impediment to onshoring and reindustrialization, combined with smart government incentives, either via the tax code or otherwise. But above all, like the Hippocratic Oath, the first step, the first rule of holes is to stop digging. So we must abandon the idea that the Chinese Communist Party is a responsible partner when it comes to technology. And this is an argument that the Biden administration and Kamala Harris is making, which is that when it comes to things like artificial intelligence safety, the Chinese Communist Party's interests align with ours. That is absurd on its face. China does not intend to use artificial intelligence for humanity's benefit. They want to dominate the technology and use things like facial recognition enabled like AI to perpetuate a genocide and really to displace America as the world's sole superpower. And so recognizing that fact and abandoning delusion of cooperating with the CCP is step one. And then step two is rebuilding our own military industrial base. And in the piece, I actually quote a member of the administration, Ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel, who's never been shy about voicing his opinion, who recently noted that our military industrial base is screwed up and the weakest link in our national security. And rebuilding it, and that is the one area where everybody should agree we actually do industrial policy, because there's not a natural commercial market for things. Let's get that right before we start subsidizing all sorts of different industries.
I listened to Ambassador Emanuel talk to Dan Senor on Call Me Back, and I was surprised to hear him say that. Let me close by asking you this, Congressman. I know you watched the first debate between Vice President Harris, former President Trump. ABC is owned by Disney. Disney operates parks in China. There wasn't one question about China in that debate. Were you surprised that China, the tariffs came up, but not China? Are you surprised? It'd be like having a debate in 1940 and not bringing up Japan. Were you surprised by the omission of China from the scorecard?
I was dismayed. I mean, this is without question the most salient national security issue of our time. How do we defend ourselves from growing Chinese Communist Party aggression? And an area where I think the candidates have meaningful differences, or at least we have 2 4-year periods that we can compare. It's sort of the closest thing to a natural experiment you can conduct, and yet it didn't come up. I think that does a disservice to all voters in America. And the traditional wisdom that foreign policy doesn't decide elections, I'm just not sure that's true. I think your average voter in Northeast Wisconsin, my home, for example, understands that China is not just an over there problem, but in light of the growing fentanyl crisis, which is abetted by the regime in China, which my committee in Congress definitively proved, in light of the growing risks of warfare with China, in light of COVID, right, which was the ultimate wake-up call to the dangers this regime poses on the world stage, understands that China is a critical issue. And so these candidates should be forced to answer hard questions. And Kamala Harris has not been forced to answer any hard questions on China or anything else, which gets to a fundamental problem with our media, which is why we're all lucky to have the great Hugh Hewitt out there fighting the good fight, even though his sports allegiances are totally out of whack. His moral compass and his conservative sensibilities are never in question.
Kamala Harris is going to give a speech Wednesday in Pennsylvania on her economic vision. You know, we are 60 days from when she took over for Joe Biden, and she's giving a speech on her economic. Let's go back, shall we? We're going to start with cut number 2 when Kamala Harris, this is from the Recode Conference in 2017, because she evolves, right? Here's 2017, Kamala, cut number 2.
You know, we have to stay woke. Like, everybody needs to be woke. And you can talk about if you're the wokest or woker, but just stay more woke than less woke. Yeah.
All right, then cut number 5, when in 2019 at a presidential debate for that year's Democratic nomination, which she dropped out of before Iowa, cut number 5.
I want to give credit to Bernie. Take credit, Bernie. You know, you brought us this far in Medicare for All. I support Medicare for All. I always have. But
okay, then let's get up to 2023, where she is the vice president for Joe Biden, cut number 1.
all that, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, that is called Bidenomics. That is called Bidenomics, and we are very proud of Bidenomics.
Cut number 13, this year's Congressional Black Caucus dinner.
A future where we can see what is possible, unburdened by what has been.
And then we go to cut number 23, Kamala Harris at the National Association of Black Journalists last week.
The joyful warrior has been used to describe
You
your
didn't see that just a
campaign.
minute ago, though. Okay, I'm back to my joyful part.
And your opponent and Republicans have at times weaponized you laughing in campaign ads, for example. Why is joy important to you to insert into this election? And what do you make of Republicans using that as a way to suggest that you're not a serious candidate?
Well, sometimes I think, and I'll say to whoever the young people are who are watching this, there are some times when your adversaries will try and turn your strength into a weakness. Don't you let them. Don't you let them. I find joy in the American people. I find joy and optimism in what I see to be our future and our ability to invest in it. I find joy in the
Hindenburg
ambition
of a
people.
candidate. Really, she's a Hindenburg of a candidate. And then over the weekend in Madison, Wisconsin, cut number 34 for the vice president.
Brother, we are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back. We will not go back.
We will not go back. I guess we're going to stick with Bidenomics. Cut number 35.
Great to be back in Madison.
I do not believe she can win at all. I think she is failing every day dropping in the polls, every day going down, every day people paying attention. Here's Mike Pompeo, by the way, talking about Iran over the weekend. This is a very serious election, and we have a very unserious person in the vice president. Cut number 45, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
So Iranian hacking efforts are not new. American passivity and laydown in the face of these threats is indecent and completely new. In the Trump administration, we would have imposed real costs on the Iranians. You can imagine economic sanctions being enforced. You know, this administration has refused to declare that the Houthis are even terrorists. For goodness sake, they're killing civilians, launching rockets and killing Israeli civilians. And the Biden-Harris team won't even declare that they are terrorists in Yemen. And now when they're trying to interfere in elections in real ways, not about memes and social media posts and comments on X, but rather actually interfere by stealing information from one campaign and delivering it to the opponent to try and influence the outcome and shape that in the battleground states.
That is, Mike is so right. The Secretary of State is so right. Good morning, Mike. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Tell us how the race stands and where people can find your website right out of the top so I don't forget it.
I love that. Thanks, Hugh. It is Rogers, ROGERS, for Senate.com. And that's the best place to get a hold of us, and you can get connected to the campaign. We're doing great. We had a poll last week that had us down 2 within the margin of error. And our opponents, like many of these competitive Senate seats, are just pouring money from outside of the state into this. They've spent $37 million on my opponent and can't get her up to 50%. So this is important for us. We're in this stretch. They are still coming in, still pounding us pretty hard. But we're in this thing. We just, Hugh, and here's how, by the way. We've got the first ground game we've had in this state this extensive, probably in 30 years. We just crossed about 3 million doors and phones in voter contact. We haven't done that in a very long time here. So we're getting people fired up, motivated. If they're not registered at the door, but they want to vote for us, we're getting them registered to vote, and we're getting them turned on to show up. And this is really going to be put your jersey on, show up to vote kind of an election. And so we're working really hard to that end.
RogersForSenate.com. Is the FOR spelled out, Mike?
Yes, sir. FOR.
ROGERS, FOR, Senate.com. Small dollar donors are needed and welcome. Mike Rogers, yes, I want to begin by asking you, Michigan's an interesting state. You have a large Arab American population. I know them well. I would often go into Detroit when I went to law school at the U and know that Dearborn is very Arab American. You also have a very large Jewish population, American population. So the war must cut both ways. However, I believe a lot of Arab Americans are Lebanese, and they don't want Israel to have to invade Lebanon, but it looks like that's going to happen because Hezbollah will not stop. What do you hear out on the trail in the state, which has got a very large Arab American population, a very large Jewish American population?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, there is lots of concern on both ends, and a lot of the both of those communities have families back in the region, so that also heightens their anxiety. But here's the interesting part of this. I think the Arab Muslims in around Dearborn and Hamtramck. I don't know if you saw, but the Hamtramck mayor Muslim came out and endorsed Trump. Said it's just too important. They're starting, I
I
think, to
did.
understand that you don't want a conflict, and if you don't want a conflict, you don't want a Harris Walz administration. They're going to continue doing what has gotten us here in the first place, and added to the conflict. And what you see in Israel, by the way, Hugh, is them playing. This is an they're trying to stem what would be an effective Hezbollah through Tehran attack into Israel. And so what you see happening isn't them being offensive, it's being them preemptive on trying to make sure that Hezbollah can't come across the border. But what the Muslims here are saying, hey, listen, we kind of get it. We didn't have this problem when Donald Trump was elected and when Republicans were in charge. I think that's what you're seeing, this shift in the Muslim side. And the Jewish side, I mean, listen, I'm not sure how you vote for Democrats given what's going on in the Middle East. If you're, if you're Jewish and American and care about Israel, but there's still a bunch of them. They feel this loyal and obligation to Democrats, and we're going to see a chunk of that. But we don't have to get them all. We just need to get the folks who don't really want conflict, who want a more stable Middle East, and want an economy that's prosperous for everybody.
Mike Rogers, I have two questions about the people that you meet out on the campaign trail. One, how often do they bring up the Israel-Hamas, Israel-Hezbollah, Israel-Iran conflict? And how often do they bring up the cost of living relative to each other? I just really do not know because I lean into national security. I follow it very closely, but I know I bought a half gallon of milk yesterday and my eyes went through my head. And I don't normally do that. The fetching Mrs. Hewitt is out of town.
Yeah, no, it is all groceries, all costs, all the time. Very rarely do I get the question. Obviously, when I'm in the southeast part of Michigan where there's bigger Arab populations and Jewish populations, I get those questions. But it is very rarely the first question. That first question is all about costs. I mean, people are using food pantries this, the last couple of days of the month here, Hugh, to feed their family. And these are working people. These aren't people who are waiting around waiting for the government to send them a check. These are working folks who are just absolutely horrified they have to do this. Think of this, about half of Michiganders could not sustain a $400 emergency event in their household, meaning if your refrigerator goes out or your stove goes out or something, they would have a very difficult time trying to come up with the money to repair it. It's really bad. And that's why I think you see the polls here in Michigan so tight. Is that the Democrats are have a machine here, no doubt, but they're telling people that are struggling every day at the grocery store that you're not really struggling. They know it. They know gas prices. Now, the Democrats are trying to pour money out the door here. They're cleaning out the federal vault, trying to buy votes. They just announced a $300 million battery plant conversion here in the state. Democrats are cheering. And people who work for a living are thinking, what in God's green earth are you doing to us? 40% less labor with this plan. I mean, they just don't see a hopeful an opportunity in the future if the Democrats continue to do what they're doing.
Now, Mike Rogers, for the national audience, and I want the national audience to understand they can contribute to rogersforsenate.com, ROGERSFOR, Senate.com. You are an FBI alum. You were an agent. A lot of people have lost confidence in the Bureau. And if you're in the Senate, I would expect you to be on Judiciary to help reform the Bureau. When Ron DeSantis said, we're going to run our own investigation of the second assassination attempt of President Trump, some took that as a criticism of the Bureau. How did you view it?
There is an incredible lack of faith in Department of Justice. It has become way too politicized. And back when I was an agent, the FBI had a more independent standing from DOJ and could say no on investigations. That just doesn't seem to be happening. And I'm questioning some things. Listen, I was an old school agent. I was called a brick agent. I went out and worked cases, and we worked murder cases and bombing cases and extortion and human trafficking, the kinds of things you want your bureau to do to protect our communities. And they have just seemed to gotten far afoot from that. And their arrogance, and they've always been arrogant. I always told them that when I was in Congress, is getting a little bit ahead of public confidence, and we have got to turn that around to get their public confidence back. It does need some reform. You know, they took a lot of decisions from field offices and put them back into Washington, D.C. I think that's a mistake. I think they ought to roll that back. And then they ought to look carefully about the kind of people they're hiring for the kind of purpose and mission that they want to accomplish. I talk to agents who just retired, and they're telling me that the flavor of those agents is very different, and they don't have the same kind of commitment to law and order. They stop and ponder a lot about the politics, and that just should not be the order of the day in the FBI. And there's important work to
Mike,
do.
I haven't known an FBI agent for probably 3 decades, but the last one I knew, Philip, who might be listening, came out of the academy down at Quantico and was assigned to Buffalo. And people don't know that you get sent places as a bureau agent. You get moved around. Where did you begin your career? Was it in Michigan?
No, Chicago. I wanted to do two things when I was in the FBI. I wanted to either chase Soviet spies, and I know I'm dating myself, or I wanted to chase gangsters. And I was successful enough at the academy. I got Chicago, and I got on the organized crime squad there, which candidly, Hugh, if they'd have told me I had to pay him to do it, I probably would have. It was an amazing experience, very gratifying. And I think we did make a positive impact on a lot of communities that were under the grip of, organized crime. And that's the kind
Did
of
you ever
bureau
get,
you want.
I got to chase Soviet spies at Justice as the special assistant for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. And there was no National Security Division then. It was just the Bureau would bring in the warrant that would come to me and then go to the Chief of Staff and then go to the AG. Mike, did you ever get to chase Soviets?
No, not directly. What we did do when I was a younger agent in Chicago, they had some technology transfer issues where the Russians were just exceptionally good about coming in and kind of befriending these professors that had access to national lab material. I'll leave it at that. And so they were very, very good. And these professors, most of them meaning well, think, they want to share, they want to grow, and so I did work a couple of those cases in the beginning, and they were just getting schnookered. So I didn't necessarily get.
I bring this up, Mike, as a closing appeal for getting you into the Senate. China is stealing us blind, and they are, whatever the Soviets were, times 10 is what the Chinese comms are doing right now. Do people in Michigan know that? Do they know that we have a national security threat greater than the Soviet threat was at the height of the Cold War?
I don't know if they know it's greater than the height of the Cold War, but they're starting to get the idea. China is a campaign issue. It is a problem. We're going to have to confront them in a way that doesn't have to lead to conflict, but it does. It will absolutely lead to some economic, grading on each country. So they're starting to get that, and they know that China is the one that's going to steal these manufacturing jobs, especially the way that the Democrats are putting down these mandates, trying to tell you what kind of car to drive, and more importantly, telling the companies what kind of cars they have to build. That's where the disaster is happening in Michigan. And we got layoffs, 2,400 at Stellantis, 1,000 at GM. Ford is announcing it, all because of these big mandates from the federal government. The Harris-Walz administration that wants to be has doubled down on this, including my opponent, by the way, who said, I won't vote for EV mandates, went back to Washington and voted for EV mandates. It is the pressure on them to turn this thing around is bad. And so, yeah, from that perspective, Hugh, they do know.
Michigan is winnable for the Republicans. Mike Rogers is a great candidate. RogersForSenate.com, RogersFor Senate.com. Go and help him out. Thank you, Mike. Come back again. Keep coming back until the election. It is very, very vitally important that we get Mike Rogers in the Senate. Years ago, when I asked Bethany Mandel to join me weekly and Mary Catherine Ham to join me weekly, because I wanted the perspective of young mothers of young children to join me. And it just happens to be that Bethany is also up to date on everything Israeli. And good morning, Bethany. This morning, the IDF is launching the heaviest attacks of the war in Lebanon, more than 300 attacks. It looks like a prelude to a ground invasion. What do your friends and family in Israel tell you?
So it's definitely feeling different than it did a week and a half ago. There are red alert sirens that are going off deeper into Israel than they have since the beginning of war, since October 8th. And that's when this war started, was October 8th. Hezbollah started sending rockets, and a lot of Americans aren't really aware of that because the focus has been on Gaza. But since October 8th, thousands of rockets have been sent over by Hezbollah, and unfortunately, a lot of them have evaded the Iron Dome. 70, 80, 90,000 Israelis have evacuated their homes in northern Israel, but these rocket attacks have gone even deeper, hitting holy sites like Nazareth, which is an Arab town and the home of Jesus. I didn't hear Candace Owens complaining about that over the weekend. And they're hitting a very holy site in Judaism called Tzfat. And there's a lot of fear. Everyone's bunkers literally are being stocked.
I have seen the prime minister tell people, stay close to your bunkers. I have seen the pictures of Defense Minister Gallant with Northern Command, and I have read that the 98th Paratroop Division has moved from Gaza to the Northern Front. It looks like a ground invasion is imminent. Also, by the way, saw a report that maybe they got Sinwar, maybe they didn't, they don't know. Have you read the same things about Sinwar and about the 98th Division going in?
I have. I've been hearing that they're giving. I mean, my friends who are in Miluim, that they're in reserves. They're being told to get themselves ready, and it's been a really really difficult year because Israel has never had a war go on for this long. And so my friends who are fathers, who are 35-year-old fathers, who have spent three-month long or 2-month long tours in Gaza or near Gaza, are now being told to prepare themselves for a Lebanese, and not invasion necessarily, but something operational in Lebanon, and it's really really grating on the entire society. I'm hearing the same about Sinwar. The folks that I'm hearing it from are not the people that I generally consider to be like my most trusted sources. So I'm sort of holding my hope on that front, but I have been hearing that also.
I asked Mike Rogers, who's running for Senate in Michigan, how, because it's got a fairly significant Jewish American population, a very significant Arab American population. He says both communities want this over and do not believe that Kamala Harris is the answer to getting it over. Agree or disagree?
I mostly agree. I mean, Israel has offered Hamas, I think, a very generous ceasefire arrangement in exchange for the return of all the hostages, safe passage for Sinwar anywhere he wants to go, and an end of the war. But uh, Hamas does not seem interested in giving this up. I don't. I mean, nothing about them makes sense. But everyone does want to see the war over for different reasons. On the Jewish side, we want the hostages back. There's 101 hostages, including 5 Americans, still in Gaza. And then, on the Arab side, I think they want an end to the destruction and the turmoil that is happening in Gaza, which is undeniable and it's heartbreaking. And it's, at the hands of Hamas at the end of the day. But no one wants to see this go on past the year mark, which is we're fast approaching.
So in Maryland, where you are, Larry Hogan would be a good friend to the state of Israel. I think Donald Trump has been and would be again a good friend to the state of Israel. But in Maryland, does that matter in places as deep blue as where you live?
So it's interesting. I live in extremely deep blue Montgomery County, Maryland. But when I drive around my community, so Orthodox Jews live in pockets because we have to be within walking distance to a synagogue. And so I live in a very Orthodox pocket. And the Larry Hogan signs outnumber the Alsobrooks by like probably 8 or 9 to 1. There are Hogan signs everywhere. My kids comment about it all the time because I was very angry at Larry Hogan when he was governor over COVID, and they asked, "Are you planning on voting for him?" And I said, "Yes," because of what you just said, because he would be a friend to Israel.
Larry Hogan would be a friend to Israel. I don't know anything about Alsobrook except she's a tax cheat. That was proven over the weekend, and I think that will hurt her. But mostly, I think Larry will be a good, solid ally of the state of Israel. Last question. Kamala wants another debate with CNN. If they swap out Dana Bash for Mary Catherine Ham, or they swap out Jake Tapper for me, I'd be fine with it being on CNN. But I would not go back to the same two. I would say, if I were Donald Trump, Fox News or mix it up. What do you say?
I mean, I thought that Dana and Jake did a great job. They brought down Joe Biden. As long as they don't do the worst of what happened during the last debate was the fact checking only on one side. The softball questions that Kamala got, that Donald Trump got much more hard hitting. If they're fair, I mean, and historically they've been quite fair. I'd say go for it.
I would not go near him again. It's the last debate if there was going to be one, and I do not trust corporate CNN. And I don't know what happened to Dana in her interview with Kamala. And I think we'd end up with Oprah 2.0. Normally, when Jim Garrity joins me during NFL season, we talk about the Browns and the Jets, but we're not doing that today. We're not going to do that today.
We aren't?
We're not. No,
Wait.
not after the Browns lost to the Giants at home. No.
It's the
Browns
Giants.
fans
Wait. It's the Giants. They're terrible. Daniel Jones looks like you look more comfortable running than Daniel Jones does.
I could have blocked better. Deshaun Watson got 8 sacks, I think. I could have blocked better. Jim, let's get to the important stuff. All right, let's put this football stuff aside. New York Times this morning has state polls from Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina, which has Donald Trump ahead of Kamala Harris by 5, 4, and 2 points, respectively. That's pretty bad news for Kamala Harris, and I think it tells us that maybe the Oprah fiasco was the fiasco I thought it was. What do you make of those numbers? What did you make of the Oprah show?
So if you listen to a lot of mainstream media coverage, pretty much every day, and every day when I'm writing the Jolt, one of the first things I check out is Meme-O-Random. It tells you what everybody's writing about. It kind of clusters them together to see which topics are big. They would have you believe that every day has terrible news for Trump and wonderful news for Kamala Harris. And there are a lot of days Trump has something bad. I don't think, putting out a commemorative coin right now is a great use of his time and energy. There are a lot of, but you add all this up. And look, the abortion issue is going to resonate so well with women. And oh my goodness, there's so much joy about the Harris campaign. And then you look at the swing state poll, because that's what it really matters and comes down to. I'm sure she's she's up 4 or 5 points in the popular vote, and that's nice, but we don't really settle the presidency through a national popular vote. It's all tied. It's all within the margin of error. There is not a single swing state where you could say, oh, there's no way Trump is going to win that one. Maybe Wisconsin looks the toughest, but every once in a while you'll find one that has him within 2. So there are 7 states that are going to determine this. They all look like jump balls. I probably give Trump the advantage in the Sun Belt states. I probably give Harris a very small advantage in the blue wall states, but they're not looking very blue wallish. And it wouldn't surprise me if Trump won Pennsylvania. It wouldn't surprise me if Trump won Michigan.
I got to play for you the new
ad.
ad. This is Donald Trump's new ad, which I think is going to run 24/7 in Pennsylvania. Cut number 38. 30-second ad.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
It's hard to believe, but it's true. Even the liberal media was shocked Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners and illegal aliens.
Every transgender inmate would have access.
Kamala's for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Kamala Harris is for they, them. Donald Trump is for you. That's pretty good writing, Jim.
Well, let's recognize at least the Trump campaign is using the appropriate pronouns for the people that that are biggest supporters of Harris. One of the things is, so you look at the Democratic convention, gleeful coverage, right? And I think you could say all of the big speakers, the Obamas, everybody went out and gave the speech that the Harris campaign wanted them to give. Tim Walz, the whole 9 yards. And the numbers stayed about the same. Then she goes out, and you and I talked about it. I think she had a way better debate than Trump did. I think Trump really, did not deliver, and the numbers are still the same. So I kind of think the idea of, oh, did the Oprah interview change things? Oh, did this ad change things? I think things are locked in. I think that everybody's in the high 40s in those swing states. And, you hate to use the cliche, it all comes down to turnout. But, Harris keeps doing things that on paper should be delivering a nice movement in the poll numbers for her. And she's not getting it in the swing states. Maybe nationally, but then it's like a % or 2.
The Oprah interview is the opposite of a good thing. I keep playing it. I keep playing her closing statement again. I played it again this morning. That tells you something. Let me ask you about this. Kamala Harris wants another debate. She wants Dana Bash and Jake Tapper. Donald Trump has said no. Now, if they switched out Dana Bash for Mary Catherine Ham, who has done presidential debates, or Jake Tapper for me, and I've done presidential debates, maybe. But I don't think that evidences that they're very confident. What do you think that demand for another Tapper Bash debate mean?
As an American, I always want more debates rather than fewer. As a journalist, I always want more debates. And I always figure if I were a candidate and I have the opportunity to reach, what was the audience for the last debate? Like 40 million people?
70 million.
You know,
70 million.
70 million. All right. Then you throw in, all the streaming and all the clips that get played afterwards. That's an opportunity you're just not going to get very often. Doing Hannity on a weeknight is just not going to reach that same audience. So why wouldn't you want to do that? Now, you'd have to prepare. You'd have to do a better job than Trump did last time. But first of all, like Trump, did a terrible debate, and it really didn't hurt him that much. And if he went out there and he, for example, right in the closing moments, he says she's been vice president for 3.5 years, and what's she done? Why hasn't she done all the things she says she wants to do now? It's a great message. He should have done that in the opening statement. He should have had that, been beating that drum all night long. Instead, he just kind of remembered it right in his closing statement. But if he went out and had a good one, presumably that would do him some good. And so my attitude is, whenever you get the chance to reach tens of millions of voters out there, do it. I know that probably only
I don't agree, Jim.
Are.
I don't agree because I thought the ABC debate was disgraceful. The former president did get mad and got off message, but it was 3 against 1, and not to bring up China once. Yeah, ABC's owned by Disney, and maybe Disney's worried about
but
their
if you
theme
do
park.
another debate, Trump can bring it up himself.
I know, but 3 against 1, he lost his cool, and I'm not happy with that. I just don't believe you walk into another ambush. Say what?
I mean, the strongest counter argument to me is that Trump had a terrible debate and it didn't hurt his numbers at all. So there's no point in doing debates. And then Harris had a great debate.
That's not my strongest number is do not give ammunition to your enemies. Do not send shells to Russia. Do not. And I after the ABC thing, I honestly I've done enough. I've done 5 of them, 4 with CNN, 1 with NBC. I know that they're completely scripted. I know the questions are vetted. I know they rehearse. I am so astonished by In the Tankness by ABC, and they were in the tank, that 5 fact checks of Trump, 0 of Kamala Harris, including no Americans in a combat zone. Honestly, Jim, I just don't think you walk into a blind canyon that way.
I suppose so. And like I said, Trump's odds are probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 50-50. But if I were the only other debate we're going to have then is going to be Vance versus Walz. And I think the problem is, let's say J.D. Vance goes out there and mops the floor with Tim Walz, which I think is a very distinct possibility. Does that move the numbers? Maybe,
no.
A little on the front. It's very tough to change.
Nobody votes for vice president. People do not vote for vice president.
So you have very limited capacity to improve your standing between now and November. And, here in Virginia, up in Minnesota, they're already doing early voting. When Trump said it's too late to do a third debate, I know it's a different environment. I know there's a lot more early voting, but Reagan and Carter did a debate a week before Election Day. I'm just like, why would you not want the opportunity to step up to the plate one more time and take another swing? Do you really think it's going to hurt?
Well, I mean, if Kamala was serious, she would have suggested Brett Baier and Martha McCollum, who I really do not know how they vote. I don't know what they are, but I trust the Fox process.
Yeah, no, they're professionals. They're gonna have good.
They're professional. They're professional,
yeah.
and I do not think Muir and Davis were professional, or they were being told. How can you not ask a question about China? I asked Representative Gallagher, who was back this morning, Mike, who's retired, writing for the Journal now monthly. How could they not ask? He said he was dismayed by that debate, Jim. Dismayed, as was I. I just wouldn't do it again.
Gallagher has a great column in today's Wall Street Journal, which will be cited.
That's what we talked about.
I might have to save that one, but the entire theme of today's Morning Jolt is, if you read the stories, the lead story in the Journal today is about spoofing GPS signals and how this is starting to mess with commercial airliners over places like Pakistan. I had written about this over the Baltics back in April, that Russia was clearly doing this, meaning to mess with commercial airliners flying into the Baltic states, Denmark, the Nordic states, places like that. North Korea had a scam where they were doing remote work and collecting cash through some guy in Tennessee. Department of Justice just indicted this guy. All of our enemies are on the move and are trying to stick it to us in one way or another in a million different ways. And you hear nothing about this on the campaign trail. Trump could be talking about this a lot more. Harris doesn't want to talk. We want to talk about coconut trees and happy memes and joy. Talking about the threats.
Not going to work.
Face. Also, by the way,
It's not going to work it's because records matter. I have been referencing the Oprah Kamala Harris sit down again this morning. It happened last week, but I had done a dissection of it with Generalissimo, Dwayne's World. His new podcast went through it blow by blow. But I had not, and Mary Catherine Ham and Vic Mattis took it apart on Getting Hammered. It was so bad. But I did not realize until I listened to Megyn Kelly over the weekend how bad it was with the celebrities. Meryl Streep is the greatest actress of my generation, and she is fabulous, but she participated in this facade. Listen to Meryl Streep talking to Oprah and Vice President Harris.
January 6th, because if it doesn't happen, it'll be maybe thrown back to the legislatures of the states. And I've been working with state government citizens campaign, which is sgcamerica.com. So they're great. They're doing the unglamorous down ballot work of promoting those candidates.
All right, stop for a second. It goes on. It is so cringe-inducing, but the beginning of it was the real cringe, where she said, "Madam President, oh, sorry, I'm a little bit too early." I don't know if we can find that. It makes your skin crawl. Now, she is a great actress, but you cannot pretend in politics. Pretending, putting out, I have been working with some unknowable, by the way, not what Kamala Harris wanted to promote, not Kamala for president. She doesn't care about this left-wing, dark money, blue ballot, get out the vote effort. She wanted Kamala. But anyway, I just wanted you to know that's what this thing was. They had a bunch of buddies of Oprah, like Meryl Streep and Julia Roberts, zoom in for a quick comment call, and all of them were cringe-inducing. And I hadn't heard any of them until I listened to Megyn Kelly. And I said, my goodness gracious, that is the worst thing. I think it's going to just completely destroy. It's sinking in how cringe-inducing this group is. Doug Burgum on with Shannon Bream yesterday, cut number 41.
I think we all know that, and the voters know that President Trump, if we're talking about the economy was super strong under President Trump, and it's been awful under Biden and Harris. Interest rates, inflation, the cost of a home, price of food, price of gasoline. President Trump wins on those. On national security, all these issues we talked about, literally he's a deterrent. If you want to see the hostages come home, vote for Donald Trump, because we will see exactly like we did when Jimmy Carter left office on the first day, Ronald Reagan, the hostages came home. That will happen again because Iran knows that President Trump will be coming with sanctions and with things that will put them back where they were before when he was in office.
Doug Burgum just killed it on Fox News yesterday. I do not know what job he's going to have in Trump 2.0. It could be anything because he can do anything, but he really, really, really understands the economy. He also understands, just got back from Israel. Dave McCormick is running for Senate in Pennsylvania. Good morning, Dave. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Hey, good morning, Hugh. How are you?
I am great. I want to read to you the announcement by the Israeli Defense Forces spokesman 20 minutes ago. We are preparing to strike terror targets in the Bekaa Valley in the near future. Hezbollah stores strategic weapons there in civilian buildings and uses the population as a human shield and knowingly puts it in danger. I am warning the Lebanese residents in the villages of the Bekaa Valley. This is a specific warning to the residents of the Bekaa Valley. Residents who are near buildings or inside homes where missiles and weapons are stored, distance yourselves immediately. Dave McCormick, I applaud the IDF for being humane. I also think they've got to take the war to the Bekaa Valley. What do you think?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think this has been what the IDF has done since the horrible events of October 7th, when they've taken the war to Gaza, or now to the northern part into Lebanon. They've time and again warned that attacks are coming to give the civilian population an opportunity to leave. And listen, this is a tough battle, but this terror has to be destroyed. This capability with Hamas and Hezbollah, which is raining missiles down on Israel as we speak, has to be destroyed. And the original sin, unfortunately, is Iran. The 2015 deal that Barack Obama did with Iran that gave them back $150 billion of sanctioned money. Bob Casey, my opponent, was the deciding vote. This is the terror network. These are the terrorist proxies. Their goal is to destroy Israel, but it's not just Israel. It's also focused on the West, and we've got to support Israel in our closest ally, one of our closest in the world, and certainly our closest in the region, in destroying this terror. Unfortunately, it's a tough business.
Dave McCormick, the last time I talked to you was on the morning of an evening that you and Dan Senor were going to hold an event in a synagogue, I believe in Collier counties of Philly. How did that go, and how are you doing both in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia among Jewish American voters who are concerned with this conflict?
You know, that event was incredible. It was a Monday night. We had an event at about 9:00 at a local synagogue, and about 350 people showed up. And a good number of those people were not Republicans. They were Democrats or independents, and they're deeply worried about the fight abroad that we just talked about, the attacks on Israel, but also the fight at home and the terror of anti-Semitism on our campuses and across our society. And that was a great discussion where I talked about the kind of leadership I will bring to this topic. I've been a strong voice on firing Liz McGill. I've been a strong voice standing against Summer Lee. I've been a strong voice for defunding universities that aren't able to stamp out anti-Semitism. Just today, I published an op-ed in the New York Post about the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, which has been languishing on the floor of the Senate for 5 months. The co-sponsors, my opponent, Bob Casey, and Chuck Schumer and Bob Casey are afraid to bring this to a vote because they're afraid they're going to alienate the extreme anti-Israel, anti-Semitic part of the Democratic Party. And so this is the kind of leadership we need. Bob Casey, my opponent, has been on the opposite side of all these things. He's endorsed Summer Lee. He hasn't been able to get this Anti-Semitism Awareness Act to a vote, and he hasn't called out for the firing of Liz McGill. We need moral clarity and leadership at this moment, and unfortunately, many in the Democratic Party and certainly Senator Casey have failed to demonstrate it.
Dave McCormick, I want to ask about recruitment. You made a choice out of high school to go to West Point. You served in the 82nd Paratroopers. By the way, the 98th Paratroop Division has moved up to the border in Lebanon. That's Israel's preeminent paratroop division. How do we fix the recruitment crisis? How do we get young men and women who want to serve to do what you did when you put up your hand for West Point?
Yeah, listen, it's heartbreaking to see all the services have missed their recruiting targets, with the exception of the Marine Corps. And there's a number of root causes. One root cause is we're not teaching our young people to believe that America is the greatest country in the world. If you don't believe America is exceptional, then it's hard to get you excited about serving America to keep it that way. And that's a big part of it. The recruiting standards, the rollout of DEI focused priorities in our military. The Army under President Biden issued its climate change strategy before its warfighting strategy. Young people don't want to sign up for that. And so we need to get a focus again in our education system, a focus on warfighting. Our military has one purpose. It's lethality, to destroy the enemy. Young people want to believe in a higher purpose. That's it. And then finally, we need to support our veterans. When our young people walk down the street and see a homeless veteran or someone that the veteran suicide rate's still 22 a day, that's a failure of our society to honor, embrace, support those who have been prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. And so those are the kinds of priorities I would bring to the Senate. I believe we need to have a strong military. I believe the Ronald Reagan line, it's peace through strength. And only by having military capability and the will to use it in support of American interest are we gonna get our young people excited about serving the greatest country in the world. And for me, it was life-changing. There's nothing in my life I'm more proud of than that service, and I would wish that opportunity on every young American.
Dave McCormick, I do not know your wife, Dina Powell, but I know Mike Pompeo and Robert O'Brien have told me she's actually the Hawk's hawk. And I don't know what dinner conversations are like in the McCormick house. It must be. Did you read The Economist today? They were wrong on the number of IBMs. You know, what do you guys talk about at dinner? Do you ever have any fun?
You know, she is the high-powered one in our marriage, and people on the campaign trail everywhere I go, they when I'm outside of Pennsylvania, they say, "Oh, you're Dina's husband," but now in Pennsylvania, they're starting to say I'm Dina's husband. So that's a challenge. Listen, she is a force of nature, and she's seen the use of power firsthand. She worked for President Bush in the White House. She worked for Condi Rice as Assistant Secretary of State, and then she had the great honor of being Deputy National Security Advisor for President Trump, and was in the room when the initial missiles, they were at Mar-a-Lago, and the President Xi was there, and the initial missiles sent into Syria when Syria crossed the red line. This is, she's seen the use of power, and we've lost deterrence because we haven't had leadership in the White House under President Biden and Harris, and Casey supported him every step of the way. We haven't had leadership that's shown the willingness to use power thoughtfully and effectively. President Trump did that. We had deterrence under Trump. I don't think our adversaries would be testing us if we didn't have the weakness of President Biden and Vice President Harris. And that's what we need to restore to the White House is deterrence, which is strength, and the willingness to use military power selectively. That's what Dean and I both believe. And it's all about leadership. Leadership is all the difference between getting our country back on track or continuing down a path which I think we all are deeply worried about America's future.
I have one more question on national security, but I want to make sure we get your website out there because small dollar donors are hard money that you can use in Erie, in Pittsburgh, in Scranton, in Philadelphia, of course. Very expensive state to run in. What is the website?
DaveMcCormickPA.com. And you can hear about all my positions. I don't think there's another candidate in the country that's laid out a more comprehensive set of positions. Everybody can find out what I believe and what I'll do when I get to the Senate.
Okay, the two Mikes, Mike Waltz and Mike Gallagher, one currently in Congress, the other one formerly in Congress, both regular guests on the show. Mike Gallagher wrote a piece for the Journal today on supply side sabotage and how the pagers and the handheld microphones exploding in Lebanon has a message for Americans that we are vulnerable to this as well. What do you think about that, Dave McCormick? What do we do about that vulnerability?
I'm a huge admirer of both Mikes, and I won't give Mike Gallagher a hard time because he's a Marine. He's a good guy. And listen,
he's a Packers fan too, so we hate that as well.
Listen, I think he's onto something, and I think it makes more clear than ever that for those things that are most important to America's security, whether it's semiconductors or pharmaceuticals or mobile devices, we need to have control of our supply chains for those areas that are of most strategic significance. We've lost that. It's been a failure of imagination in both parties over many years. But the fact that our pharmaceutical supply chains are owned by others, the fact that we don't have semiconductor capacity here at home, the fact that we're losing our shipbuilding capacity, these are all parts of the expanded defense industrial base that we need to control. And so I think it's a moment of reflection. And I've laid out an agenda for how we need to bring those strategic industries home. And this is another good example of that. It was a very clever, smart, offensive move on the part of the Israelis, but it's also a warning for all of us of the need to control our supply chains in those areas that make us most vulnerable.
Well said. DaveMcCormickPA.com, DaveMcCormickPA.com. Get involved, especially if you're listening in one of my Pennsylvania markets. Get out there, get involved in the campaign, go to the local operation and say, hey, I'm here, what do you want me to do? And then send $25, $50, $100. Hard dollars count, America. Hard dollars count. Dave McCormick, thank you. There's a book out there which you're going to want to buy, American Leviathan. Holding it in my hand, American Leviathan is by Ned Ryan. American Leviathan published on Friday. I read it over the weekend. We're going to get Ned up here shortly on the phone. His internet failed, so he can't do the picture for the Salem News Channel, but I still want to talk to Ned about this book because in a very concise, very, how do I put this? Clear, concise, expedited fashion, he reviews the history of American progressivism, which grew out of Prussian statism and which is opposed to constitutional originalism. Ned and I have known each other a long time. He and his brother began a wonderful, extraordinary founding of the voter gravity and American majority operations, and voter gravity and American majority have been helping Republicans turn out candidates for many, many years. I don't know where Ned finds the time to write books at the same time, but he's been a valued member of the grassroots effort everywhere in the United States. And somehow he found the time to say, why are we doing this? And he wrote it down in American Leviathan. And American Leviathan is the short history of American progressivism, which began late in the 19th century, was in its heyday in the early 20th century, right through Woodrow Wilson. TR was a progressive as well, and they believed in the false god of expertise. They did not believe in the Constitution. Woodrow Wilson was the most prominent of them all, but there's Herbert Crowley, there's John Burgess, there's Richard Ely. There's all sorts of progressives out there who have spent decades filling textbooks and academic journals and the minds of elites with the idea that human beings are perfectionists, or can be perfected, not perfectionists. Some people can be perfectionists, but we cannot be perfected. We are not perfectible. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. James Madison wrote that 200 plus years ago, and it's still the case. And in American Leviathan, it is teased out at great length. Tell you what, Ned, good morning. How are you, Ned?
Morning, Hugh. How are you?
I'm great. I was just giving the longest commercial possible for American Leviathan. And I was dancing because I know about Herbert Crowley and I know about John Burgess and Richard Ely. And I had never, however, used the term Prussian statism before until I read American Leviathan. And I raised the question with the audience. You're a busy guy with American majority and with voter gravity. Why take the time to write American Leviathan?
Because I think it's one of the most important issues of the 2024 elections, Hugh. I mean, you're right. I'm very busy with American Majority Action, our C4. We're doing some pretty significant absentee ballot generation and chase programs and early vote programs in Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, North Carolina. But the whole point, Hugh, in my mind, of achieving political power with the right people is to day one of the next administration, hopefully with a powerful executive, duly elected representative of the American people as head of the executive branch, going after the administrative state, which resides primarily inside that Article 2 branch, because, Hugh, if we continue much longer down this path, I believe that representative democracy has been a bit of a farce. I believe that a lot of people in D.C. were done with it a long time ago. And the administrative state, on its very basic premise, is this, that you would have a unaccountable bureaucracy separated out from political accountability, in which these unelected bureaucrats would do most of the governing of the country. This is what Woodrow Wilson and Crowley and all these guys wanted at the very beginning over 100 years ago. And then you find yourselves in 2024 going, this doesn't feel like a government of, by, and for the people, in which the American people are prioritizing all things first and last, and their interests are defended by this government. In fact, we kind of, if we are even a thought, Hugh, we're an afterthought. And
what I want to praise, Ned, it's the first book that has actually brought up OPM's role in this and OMB's role in this. You're talking to the former acting director and deputy director of OPM, their general counsel. And I know from the Reagan years forward, OPM is the center of gravity for the state, for protecting the administrative state. It's got to be changed. And you got into that. I had not seen that in print anywhere before. How did you know about OPM?
So I am good buddies with some folks that got to run presidential personnel, which is one of the most important positions, Hugh, in any administration, is the Office of Presidential Personnel, PPO. And the guys that ran it the last year, Johnny McEntee with some of his deputies, James Bacon and others, they had some ideas. And I asked them, could I talk to you guys about some of these ideas for my new book, Reform Items, for the next president who comes into the White House? How are you going to address this deeply unconstitutional administrative state. So I give some credit in the back of the book, Hugh, but
I read Johnny's name in there. I know his dad. I don't know Johnny.
Yeah, Johnny to me was one of the rock stars for Trump because he figured out, what's really going on and the importance of it. I have to tell you, Hugh, and I've told Trump this, and I'll say it here. PPO was kind of a disaster the first 3 years of his administration because you were not sending people into these various departments and agencies. Again, every administration, for those listening, there's a plum book. There's about 5,000, give or take, political appointees, of which probably 400 or 500 are key decision makers. You got to get those right.
Ned, again, going back to Reagan years, after OPM, I went to California and stayed there until 2016. My boss at OPM, the one who left, Connie Horner, was PPO for W and did a pretty good job. Yep. PPO is everything if you're going to go after, but it's not enough. And what I liked about American Leviathan is that you target OMB and OPM. I think that if there is a Republican majority in the Senate and one in the House, and you get a big swing in reconciliation, they ought to repeal the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978, bring back patronage in a big way, get rid of lifetime tenure. You can't fire anyone in the federal government. And the Plum Book should be about a third the size it is. And I don't know, is American majority working to make sure we get the Senate and the House in Republican hands as well?
So we're focused primarily on these presidential battleground states, of which 3 of the 4 have key Senate races. Hugh, I don't think I'm telling anybody that's rocket science or a startling fact. Trump has to win these battleground states probably by 3 to 4 points at a minimum to pull these Senate candidates across the finish line. So the goal is to really focus on getting the ballots in, getting the early vote pumped up before we come into Election Day, not only obviously to get the presidential race right, but also to help the Senate candidates and where we have overlapping House races, that as well. Because you're right. Trump could do a lot. Let's just say in theory, the head of the executive branch, Trump, he could do a lot of good work over the course of 4 years simply as head of the executive branch. But without Congress stepping up to the plate, first of all, you have to have a majority of people that actually agree with Trump that this is a real problem. Unless you have a majority that goes along with him, his reform items would be relatively short-lived over the course of 4 years, unless, of course, another Republican won the White House. So Congress at some point has to step up to the plate, but they can't step up unless you have a majority.
And when I say reconciliation, this is for the benefit of the Steelers fan. I hope American majorities in Pennsylvania. We're going to slow way down here. Reconciliation is the only vehicle by which you can change law via a simple majority in the Senate, because we don't want to lose the filibuster because we got to protect the Supreme Court. But we could repeal tenure for civil servants. We could move lots of the government to the heartland. We could turn Schedule F on its head and make it work. We could do all that. I mean, is anyone writing the text of the law, Ned? Because American Leviathan makes the case, but a lot of us are already persuaded. Someone's got to write the text.
Right. Well, and my concern, Hugh, is that there are a lot of Republicans sitting in D.C. that maybe have accepted the premise that the administrative state is okay. We've kind of been desensitized to it. It's been going on for so long that I don't know how many Republicans in D.C. would reject the premise that the administrative state is legitimate. So you've got to get people that actually agree in principle with Trump that this is a serious problem. But I would hope that more Republicans in D.C. understand that if you're going to have representative democracy, if you're going to have the Article I legislative branch doing the real legislating, which, by the way, they haven't been doing in a while, you actually have to reject the premise. That's why they consider Donald Trump, a lot of permanent D.C., the administrative state, considered Donald Trump an existential threat. It's not he's a threat to democracy, which, by the way, they have a very twisted view of what that actually is. He is an existential threat because he rejects the premise. He rejects that this is legitimate and that they should be the ones deciding and doing the true governing. And that really, to me, Hugh, just to make one last point on this, Russian collusion, Ukrainian quid pro quo, lawfare, all of these things, you peel it all back, it comes down to who decides, and a clash between 2 very different governing philosophies, a republic versus an administrative state. That's what all this has been about for pretty much the last decade between Trump and D.C.
I agree. Constitutional originalism versus progressive Hegelianism, or what you call Prussian statism. You've nailed it. American Leviathan nailed it. Glory to Jefferson, as Lincoln said. But what we really need is to repudiate the early 20th century lock, stock, and barrel, and you do so in American Leviathan. So hat tip to you, Ned Ryan. Keep doing the good work. You guys are out there every day. I know that, and I appreciate American Majority. Appreciate you, and I loved American Leviathan. Thank you for joining me this morning.
Thanks so much, Hugh. I appreciate it.
Be well.